What's up, Cheeseheads? Welcome back, and as always, thank you for joining me. For those tuning in for the first time, welcome. My name is Paul Brettel. I'm the site editor over at Dairyland Express, where we cover the Packers, Brewers, Bucks, and Badgers. I also have a new article out every Monday and Friday over at Cheesehead TV. And as it says at the bottom of the screen here, you can follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. So we are into the bye week, but before we take a look back at how we got to this point and where the Green Bay Packers stand, what's next for them, we're going to look at week 12, their matchup with the Los Angeles Rams, and wrap things up. We've now had the opportunity to digest everything that's taken place, go back and rewatch the game. So I wanted to share my three big things from this performance. Now, this is an article that I put out every Monday or every day following the Green Bay Packers game. I have my three big things. Sometimes it's four, sometimes it's five, but it's the big things. What defined that Green Bay Packers performance this week? I had three in particular that I wanted to write on. And again, you can find these over at Dairyland Express. And then after that, I just have some quick takeaways, quick thoughts that I wanted to share as well. These are from my instant takeaways article. I post this immediately following the Green Bay Packers game. It's just bullet point style. Again, my immediate thoughts to what we just saw. But first, let's dive into the three big things. So, first one, the Green Bay Packers stuck with the run game. Coming into this game, this was one of my big keys for the Green Bay Packers offense to find success. Now, first off, running the ball against this Rams defensive front, it was never going to be easy. They rank first in ESPN's run stop win rate. They're giving up only 4 yards per rush entering this game, which was the fifth fewest in football. And the Green Bay Packers, of course, have a banged up offensive line. 3 of their 5 preferred starters are out: Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, David Bakhtiari. And of course, on the opposing side, Aaron Donald, Leonard Floyd, Greg Gaines, a whole litany of defensive players looking to wreck the Green Bay Packers game plan. So running the ball was never going to be easy. And honestly, the way it played out, where picking up yards was extremely difficult, is to a degree basically what I think a lot of us expected to happen. But it was still important for Green Bay to stick to the run game. We've seen, now the Packers haven't lost a lot in the Matt LaFleur era, but we've seen when they do, there's a common thread. They get away from the run game. It turns this offense one dimensional. They become pass heavy. Had that happened against this Rams defensive front, it would have been a recipe for disaster. We saw it to a very small degree towards the end, or at the end of the first half, Green Bay's last possession, or in obvious pass rush or passing situations. The Rams defensive front, they were just able to bull through, particularly the middle of that Green Bay Packers offensive line. And had that been the norm over the course of the game, it would have been extremely difficult to move the ball, extremely difficult to put up points. So the Green Bay Packers needed to stick with the run game, and they did, despite only averaging 2.9 yards per rush. They had their longest run of the day was 8 yards by A.J. Dillon, but they stuck with the run game. Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon had 30 carries for the game. Now, I know that number is a little inflated because Green Bay had the lead at the end of the game. So, of course, they're going to run the ball in that situation. But throughout the course of the game, they consistently made an effort to run the ball. And that was the important part. Rodgers still threw the ball 45 times. I'm not expecting there to be a 50-50 split. I talk about how important this run game is to this Packers offense quite a bit, but I never expect the 50-50 split. The breakdown was about 62% pass, 38% run. I think that's normal. I think that's pretty reasonable. What we wanted to avoid was 75-25, 80-20. That's where this team can really get into trouble. And as I've talked about before, even though the run game isn't ripping off these big chunk yardage gains, it can still be effective if the defense believes that in a given situation, there is the possibility that you might run the ball. You're making the defensive front, the defenders, the defensive coordinator having to factor that into their play call, how they react, what they read. All of that absolutely matters. And you can still accomplish that even though you're not averaging 5-6 yards per carry. Again, the Green Bay Packers were only averaging 2.9, but they stuck with it. They got 30 carries for Jones and Dillon. And I think that was a big part of the just overall success that this offense had. Again, as is the case in football, there's never one single reason behind any success, behind any failure. But Green Bay's ability to stick with the run game, even though it was very, very difficult, I think was a key factor in this game and just in general the offense's success. For the offensive line, we talked about just how, becoming one dimensional would have been very difficult for them. But also in the run game, it allows them to be the aggressor. That's a more physical. You are the one trying to move someone else. Whereas in pass pro, you're more kind of there waiting for them to come to you. So with a young offensive line, experience off of offensive line, I think that's really beneficial for them as well. Let them be the aggressor. So I think the Green Bay's ability to stick to the run game, even though it was tough sledding, was a big part of their success on offense. Next up, let's talk about the offensive line. This patchwork offensive line actually held up pretty well. Now, we mentioned how difficult it was to run against the Rams. Their pass rush defense is just as good. They ranked first in ESPN pass rush win rate, first by PFF's grading system. They're seventh in pressures this season. Just overall, this is a dominant defensive front. And as I mentioned, Green Bay was without three of their five preferred starters, but they were able to hold up quite well. And that's a credit to Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers for this game plan. We already talked about how the run game can benefit the offensive line. Green Bay relied heavily on the quick passing game. Rodgers had 26 of his pass attempts that were 9 yards, that traveled 9 yards or fewer. He completed 24 of them for 172 yards with 2 touchdowns. They got the ball out of his hands quickly. That was an absolute must. Had Rodgers held on to the ball, again, that was going to be, and waiting for these longer developing routes, that was not going to be a recipe for success for this offense. So leaning on the run game, the quick passing game, utilizing motion, Green Bay did an excellent job. Matt LaFleur did, of moving guys around pre-snap. Again, that helps the offensive line because it leaves creates some confusion, leaves the defense guessing a little bit. We saw play action, a few boots. Overall, just the game plan in general was tailored to helping this Packers offensive line, which, as we've discussed, was needed against this Rams defensive front. But I don't want to take away, everything from the performance of Yash and Runyon, Lucas Patrick, Billy Turner, and Royce Newman either, because even with all that, help and eye candy that Matt LaFleur can, conjure up pre-snap, there's still going to be plenty of snaps over the course of the game where those guys are on a one-on-one island, where they have to win that one-on-one matchup, where they have to create that running lane. And for the most part, they were able to do so. According to Pro Football Focus, the Rams are still able to generate 20 pressures. It's not that the Packers offensive line was flawless by any means, but I also don't think that anything that we saw was egregious. Again, what's your expectation going into this game? Going into this game, you're going to expect Green Bay to struggle in those obvious passing situations, which they did, to block this Rams defensive front. But for the most part, leaning on the run game, quick passes, they were able to keep themselves out of those situations, and it really benefited the offensive line. Last up, Packers were able to capitalize off turnovers. If we rewind just a week ago, their inability to catch the football on defense was a big reason that they lost. There were 3 or 4 legitimate turnover opportunities that Kirk Cousins was trying to gift Green Bay, but they just could not take the ball away. This week, different story. They not only capitalized on completing those turnovers, but the offense was able to find success as well and punch the ball in for some points. Game started, second possession for the Rams. Rashawn Gary came through with a strip sack. Green Bay starts on the 6-yard line. That leads to a touchdown, 7 points. The very next possession, Adrian Amos makes a fantastic, such a good play. He looked like a linebacker filling the gap on that 4th and 1. The read, the recognition, shooting the gap, finishing the play, making the tackle. Just a tremendous play by Adrian Amos. And that led to a turnover. Green Bay Packers took over around, I believe it was the Rams' 30-yard line. They were able to score a touchdown, but again, they kicked a field goal. So that was 10 points right there. Fast forward to the second half. Rasul Douglas, of course, had the pick 6 that he housed, and then the Rams would fumble a punt return attempt, and Green Bay would convert a field goal on the recovered ball from there. So Green Bay finished with 20 points off of those turnovers. They scored 36 for the game. They won by 8 points, and 20 of them came from the defensive unit or special teams putting the offense in a position to succeed. Following that Vikings game, Aaron Rodgers discussed how one of the big differences this year between the 2020 Packers offense, which was by several metrics the best in football, in this year's unit is that they've gotten off to some slow starts, and that's absolutely been the case. But the defense in particular early on, they let the offense, they gave them that opportunity to take an early lead, which they did. Green Bay scored on two of their three first possessions. They were up 10-0. Green Bay would score on two of their final three possessions, uh, the offense, during that first half. So they finished the first half with 20 points, scoring on four of their six possessions. They got off to a much faster start than what they have in several games this season, and it was a credit to that defense. So the turnovers, not only creating the turnovers, coming away with the ball, but the offense was able to generate 20 points off them as well. That was a huge factor in this game. So those are my three big things. Now we're just going to go boom, boom, boom through some bullet point items that I have as well. First up, the lack of practice time. Aaron Rodgers is a Hall of Famer. He's one of the best to ever sling a football, coming off an MVP season. He's playing well again this year, but practice time matters, and we're seeing that. We didn't see it as much on this past Sunday against the Rams, and I think part of that was the game plan, the quick passing game. But against Seattle, against Minnesota, those first halves, those are some slow starts, some un-Rodgers like plays, moments where he's missing his receivers downfield, at times looked uncomfortable in what he saw, passing up the easy read. And I think a lot of the problems, again, there's never one singular reason, but I think a big contributor to the offensive slow start, just not being as dominant as they were a year ago, is the lack of practice time. That Friday before the Minnesota game, Rodgers practiced in a limited fashion. That was his first practice since he went on the COVID list. So the Packers played October 28th, I believe it was, against the Arizona Cardinals. He would then go on the COVID list the following week. And the Friday before the Vikings game was his first practice. So he hasn't practiced since about roughly the third week of October. That Friday practice, that was his first practice with Devontae Adams since that third week of October. He still, to this date, has not practiced with Allen Lazard since the third week of October. And he's had that one practice, that Friday before the Vikings game practice. That was his only one with Marquez Valdes-Scantling since the Niners game, week 3. As I'm sure you recall, MVS left that game with a hamstring injury. He would go on IR. He would return against Kansas City when Rodgers was out. And then, again, that one practice. So there has not been the same. There's been hardly any practice for Rodgers and his receivers. Even with as good of a connection, especially with Devontae Adams, that he has, I think that's still playing a big, big part in the just kind of the rust that this unit has, or not rust, but they're just not firing on all cylinders. Rodgers still has that pinky toe injury. It's going to be a part of this season for him. It seems like it's going to be something he's going to have to play through. So hopefully coming out of the bye, it's in better shape and he can get back on the practice field. That's going to be very important. If not, we still may not see this offense, at least the passing game, fully clicking like it did a season ago. Next up, edge rusher. Rashawn Gary, welcome back, man. We missed you. Preston Smith continues to have that bounce back season that we were hoping for. But we saw Sunday against the Rams, there was, when those two are on the field, because as much as we want them to be on the field for every snap, they can't. They need some time off. They were missed. Tipa Galeai and Ladarius Hamilton were taking over. And obviously, there's a drop-off in skill level when those two are on the field. And so the edge rusher depth is just something to watch moving forward because, I mean, it is a bit of a concern. We don't know. Hopefully, Zadarius Smith comes back, but Green Bay's been obviously without Whitney Merciless, who provided a big pass rush boost, who's now on season-ending IR. And there's plenty to like about Tipa and his game. He's got some tremendous speed, called like a Tasmanian devil-like spin move that he has. But again, he's in his second year. He was an undrafted rookie. There's still some development that's needed, and he is on the smaller side. Not height-wise, I think he's about 6'5", 6'6", but he's only about 230 pounds. I mean, Mike Smith this summer said himself, Packers outside linebackers coach, needs to add on 10 pounds. So he has that speed to his advantage, but against offensive tackles, I mean, if he gets locked in, it's going to be tough for him to break free. So keep an eye on that edge rusher depth. Gary, Preston Smith, they're both playing at a very high level, one of the better duos in the league in terms of edge rushers. But like I said, they can't play every snap. And when they're off the field, it's going to create a deficiency at that position just because Green Bay is really lacking depth at this time. I also want to give a shout out to the run defense. The run defense is not going to have any eye popping numbers. They just aren't. They're giving up 4.3 yards per rush this season, which I think ranks 22nd by ESPN's numbers. They're in the bottom half of the league. By Pro Football Focus, they're in the bottom half of the league in terms of their rankings, grading systems, all that. Again, they're not dominating. They're not posting eye-popping numbers, but they've been much more impressive this season. It's week 12. Green Bay Packers have played 12 games, and they are yet to allow a single 100-yard rusher yet this season. Add in the fact that this Joe Barry defense, they play with light boxes quite a bit. That's what they did against the Rams to stop their passing attack. That's what they did against Seattle, Arizona, Kansas City. They're playing with minimal guys in the box. They're putting their help in the secondary to limit the passing games. Green Bay's defense is essentially saying, don't pass the ball. We're going to stop that, but run the ball. Go ahead, run the ball. They're daring offenses to run the ball. But this defensive front is still coming up with stops. They're not letting the opponent take over. And that's the big thing. That's one of the big differences from past seasons. I mean, we all remember 2 years ago how that NFC Championship game ended. And even last year, there were games where, I mean, the loss to Minnesota at Lambeau Field last year, Dalvin Cook went nuts against this defense. There hasn't been that type of game this season. Now, of course, it helps that late as the games have been progressing, once that offense starts getting going, the Packers are playing with a lead. That certainly helps. But still, Kenny Clark is playing at an all-pro level. He's getting the help from Dean Lowry, who's had a fantastic season by his standards up to this point. Kingsley Keke has flashed in a few games. Tyler Lancaster, TJ Slaton have had some nice moments as well. Overall, that defensive front against the run, they've done a very good job, especially when the comparison is to what we've seen in the past. Again, not dominant by any means, but much improved. Lastly, Green Bay's been very good at preventing the big play this season. There were 2 instances on Sunday where 2 of the Rams' touchdowns came via the deep ball. It's not happened often this season, but the safety help was not there over the top on both instances. Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage had bit on underneath routes. But I just want to go back, and this kind of ties into what we were just talking about with the run game. Joe Barry has made it basically the defense's goal that we are not going to allow the passing game to beat us. And for the most part this season, they haven't. Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, those 3 quarterbacks combined for 601 passing yards, 1 touchdown, and they threw 4 interceptions. Again, it's having that extra help in the secondary, but of course, credit to the secondary as well. Rasul Douglas, Eric Stokes, Savage, Amos, Kevin King. I know he's missed had time with injuries. Wasn't his best performance in Minnesota, but he's, for the most part, played better than what we saw in 2020. So this defensive system that Joe Barry's brought in, I think it really is making a big difference. It's not a coincidence that these role players who have had to step up, Rasul Douglas, Devondre Campbell, Dean Lowry, Chandon Sullivan, how they're all having some of their better years that they've had in their NFL careers. Of course, credit to the player, but to Joe Barry as well. So there you have it. My 3 big things and then a few additional takeaways from Sunday's performance. As always, I want to thank you guys very much for joining me. Hit subscribe on the video or on the page if you haven't done so yet. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. And you can find my work at Dairyland Express and Cheesehead TV. As always, everyone, take care, stay safe, and as always, go Pack, go.